All right, we are ready to get started. Today is going to be an interview session where we're really going to be addressing how to ensure equity and acceleration through competency-based learning and grading. My name is Mitzi Clark Richardson, and I am a culture design strategist. And that really means that I work with specific partner districts that we have. I'm a project lead, so some of you I've worked with before, and I'm glad to see you on this Zoom call with us. And I'm going to be interviewing three sort of expert educators. So our CEO, Shannon is going to be with us today to really share some insights from a district systems level. Lauren Hurt Ashwin is going to be joining us from and sharing her insights as a teacher that did competency-based learning and grading. And also Ashley Guadarrama is also going to be sharing with that same perspective. You'll notice that everybody from Engage to Learn is an educator, and so we're sharing some of our insights through this process, and so we're excited that you've joined us today. I'm going to allow the interviewees to just share a little bit about their background and teaching experience, so you'll get some insight to their answers whenever we move on to questions. Shannon, would you like to get started?
Sure, thanks. So this is a great topic. We just finished doing the learning model session, and really the learning model is a competency-based model. It allows you to do competency-based learning, and I fell in love with this when I was an assistant superintendent in a district, and really it was right after the standards, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills had come in, become law. And it became very clear from that we had entered into a standards-based system. And so as an assistant superintendent, I led the implementation of us moving to competency-based grading and reporting. And so we changed the report cards, and we started, we had a lot of pushback, as you can imagine, this in the early 2000s, of people like, what? I want my kid to have a grade. What are you talking about? And so it, wasn't well received at first, but people really ended up loving it. And so we rolled it up a grade level at a time, and I can share a little bit more about that later. But I love what this does in terms of truly differentiating for learners, and can share from that the district perspective.
Thank you. Lauren, would you like to share?
Sure. I'm Lauren Hurt Ashwin, and I'm a former middle school science teacher in Irving ISD. And we were kind of a standalone campus in the work that we were doing, and our principal had a vision for what grading could look like. So it's a little bit different maybe from Shannon's experience at Coppell and from Ashley's experience down in South Texas. But I'm happy to share about all the different ways we were creatively as a campus trying to meet the needs of our learners and what that looked like in our grade books.
And Ashley?
Thanks for having me, Mitzi. My experience is similar to Lauren's. It was more at a campus-based. I worked at Harlingen, the Harlingen School of Health Professions and Harlingen CISD. And so it was more of a campus-based initiative, but in terms of like the grading per se, that was more like amongst teachers and in their individual classrooms. So I can also speak to how I did that in my classroom, regardless of what the report cards looked like for the campus and for the district.
That's great, thank you. We're going to start off our first question of the interview by just asking Shannon if she would share, what exactly is competency-based learning and grading, and how is it different from traditional teaching and grading?
Okay, so how many of you have heard, just raise your hand or picture, how many of you have actually heard of competency-based learning or grading before? Okay, awesome. How many of you have heard of, yes, or there's that thumbs up, yeah. Or how many of you have heard of mastery learning? Some of you may have heard of mastery learning or mastery grading. So competency-based and mastery are used kind of interchangeably. Essentially, the idea of it is, and it looks like a lot of you already know this, but the idea of it is instead of getting, an average grade, you're actually graded, or you're learning based on set competencies. So there's the basic idea of it is usually standards based. So you're following the standard, and as you're learning that standard, essentially you're it's almost like game based, like when you get to a certain level on that standard, then you've mastered it. And so that's then you get the, different people do it different ways, so I'm hesitating to say what you get then, but basically it's following what your mastery is of particular standards. Now, some people are using competency-based grading and learning to include some of the key competencies like that are outside of the standards, which is awesome. So they're including those kind of competencies into the idea of it's all the standards and these other, future ready or life ready skills or competencies. And so that are more college career readiness pieces, which is great. But then for each of those, you are, instead of getting a number grade or a letter grade for English, you're getting, or for math or for science, you're actually getting a grade or a rating on each of those standards. Separately, or there's different ways to do it, but that's the idea. Kind of leveling up, if you will.
That's great, Shannon. Thank you. The next question, I'm going to direct kind of to Lauren and Ashley, but what caused you to make this shift to competency-based learning and grading? And either one of you can choose whichever one feels led first.
I'm happy to go first. We worked at a campus that was very student-centered, and our campus leader had a vision for that. We didn't necessarily have the ability at the time to change up our entire grading system. So what I appreciated about what we ended up doing is that it was kind of a stepping stone in the in-between. Like maybe we weren't going to overhaul the entire grading system, but what could we do to step in that direction? So we were challenged to transform our grade book a little bit, and that every column, every grade that was entered in had to be labeled with a TEAC number specifically. And just that alone was a big shift for everyone. But then it really had a lot of conversation around, well, if that's what it's being labeled as, then that grade needs to truly reflect that student's ability with that standard. And then, what they did to get that, and then what was entered in and when, that was kind of a separate conversation about, but like that should truly represent their understanding of that specific TEAC. And we had, formatives and summatives for each. And just with those simple guidelines of you have this many formative and summatives per standard, and it should be labeled accordingly, the conversations that it opened up were pretty amazing. So just in wanting to be more student-centered and to be more going towards more competency-based, even some of those small changes had a really huge impact across our campus.
My experience was very similar to that of Lauren's. It was more of an individual grade book. We didn't have, the system change throughout, the district or whatnot, but our grade books were listed by standard. And so the students actually knew, like my grade book basically reflected what their trackers look like. And so the students were tracking their mastery. So all the things that they were doing, all the leveled, the leveled assignments that they had, and the individual plans that they were working towards, all of that was more of, they understood that as more of like a practice and getting them to mastery. And then they obviously had the formatives for actual mastery, and that's what you would see in the grade book. But everything leading up to that, they didn't see it as necessarily like assignments I have to complete and everybody's doing the same amount. It was more of, I need to learn this, so I need to do X, Y, and Z. And then what was reported was ultimately the mastery of the standard. So it was definitely a shift that I knew needed to happen, because if the students were tracking mastery by standard, why wouldn't my grade book look the exact same way? And so at any point, they were pretty much mirroring one another. So very similar to Lauren's, but definitely a lot of student ownership in that process.
Thanks for sharing. The next question would be directed towards Shannon, just kind of giving us sort of some insights on why do you think districts are, really considering this approach in the upcoming school year?
So this is one of the examples of how I feel like what's happened is helping us get to a place that we really needed to be before. So we adopted, how many of you remember the essential elements? Raise your hand if you remember the essential elements. People are not going to want to probably, or maybe some of you, had this as a student. Yeah, exactly. Some of us don't want to admit it, right? Like I don't want to admit it, but I taught under the essential elements. The difference when we moved from the essential elements to the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills in 1998 was that the essential elements were phrased like this. Basically, students are giving the opportunity to blah, blah, blah. The change when we went to the text was the student will master blah, blah, blah. There's a big difference because the student giving the opportunity means I can just plan and teach it and check. I can check that off. With the flip to the student will master 2.5A, and then that means that I can't leave that until that student has mastered it. That's what that means. And yet our grading system is still based on, I taught it, right? So the essential elements, basically that's what you said, you teach it. The Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills was they master it. So really we should have moved to mastery-based or competency-based grading and learning when we switched in 1988 to the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. We didn't. Why do we need to do it now? First, it matches the accountability system that we're in. We are in a standards-based, competency-based accountability system. And as long as we keep a different grading system, we will not get kids to master it the way that we need to. But if we move that, the reason that it makes so much sense this fall in 2021 is because of the need for differentiation and mitigating the learning loss. Mastery-based grading and learning actually is the most efficient way to get everybody up to speed quickly. Because again, like Ashley and Lauren described, they're literally just getting what they need. So that's the reason. I mean, and you could, if you did a pre-assessment and certain kids had already mastered certain things, they don't need to learn anything about it, right? Like you already, that's it, check, that one's gone. That could happen for a whole class, right? So it shouldn't be based on our lesson plans. It needs to be based on where they are in their mastery. That's why it's so important right now.
That's great, Shannon. Thank you. I think you really answered our next question during that answer, which was just what's the benefit of it? So, but Lauren and Ashley, if you have anything to add to that, feel free.
I'll go ahead and chime in. Lauren, you took first on the last one, so I'll take this one. So definitely a benefit was the students weren't wasting their time on things that they had already mastered. And so like Shannon had mentioned, they had a pre-assessment at the beginning of each unit that we rolled out. And if they already knew certain things or up to a certain level based on how I had, mapped it out and leveled it, then they would continue and go beyond that versus a student that maybe did need that extra support. I could provide that very specific attention to those groups of students that needed that remediation, while the others weren't wasting their time with what we would call busy work, just trying to complete assignments that are on a list of assignments. And so it really was based on what the students needed for mastery and to achieve that mastery, and not, wasting their time with all the extra fluff and getting, right to the point. And so in reality, it saved time. And then the students that were able to move forward, they could go to the next standard, and they didn't have to wait for me. They didn't have to wait for other students. They were getting what they needed. And so that was the only way for us, to do it. I could never go back. Once we had this type of learning and this type of, grading and assessing, there was no way that we were going to go back. The students knew what they needed, and they were working towards mastery, not working towards completing assignments.
I'll just add to that, Ashley. One thing is, as a teacher, there was an additional shift that had to happen in my mind and on our campus in order for this to be effective. And it was that students were going to learn in lots of different ways. And it was no longer going to be from me direct teaching everything. Because if you don't make that shift, that with our technology, through collaboration, through small group instruction, I can meet the needs of everyone instead of trying to direct teach everyone the same thing and try and meet their needs. It didn't make sense to me at first until my coach helped me understand we are rethinking how you spend your time and how kids spend their time in the classroom. So that direct teach piece where you're spending the majority of your time, let's take those minutes and that chunk of time and rethink about what learning is going to look like. And then that opened the door for all the small group pieces, the differentiation, truly working towards mastery of the standards and not having every kid doing the same thing because they don't need all the same thing. I couldn't make that shift until my coach helped me kind of rethink what I was currently doing in a traditional setting. And so I wanted to mention that because that was a big leap that, once you go there, you can never go back. And it was probably one of the best things that, that's ever happened to me as an educator. But it definitely is something that when I'm coaching teachers, I see like until we can make that shift, these other pieces don't necessarily make sense yet, I guess. At least that was my journey anyway.
Those are really great insights. Thank you, ladies, both for sharing. The next question that I want to ask is, when you consider competency-based learning, how does it prepare students for their futures? So you'll kind of describe what it is and kind of some things that needed to shift in the teacher's mindset, but let's now discuss how that might impact students in the long run.
Yeah, thanks, Mitzi. It definitely was a shift for the students, just like it was for the teacher. They had not been used to this type of, self-accountability and them being able to drive their own learning. It was very much, what is the teacher going to share with me and give me? And then, I just work towards that. And so this opened up just so many opportunities and paths for them to move on with what they needed. And so I'm actually doing a panel later, in our Redesign conference today. And so in preparing for that, I actually got to speak with some of my previous students who will be on the panel. And it was so interesting to hear where they're at now and how the things we did prepared them for it. And so some of the things I'll just share with you, and you can obviously hear them firsthand when they share later. But they said knowing, what they needed to know and didn't already know, and what they already knew and they didn't need to work towards was a big help when they moved into the, college atmosphere, because a professor would give out, this is the end goal and this is what I need you to know. And they had to go and hold themselves accountable for all the things they needed to research and or prepare and or work through and or, reach out to a peer for to learn prior to whatever it is that the professor assigned to them. And so they said, had they not prepared themselves while they were, in high school going through the E12 learning model, they may have not had the skills necessary. And they saw that in some of their peers that they just weren't prepared for that level of self-accountability and autonomy. And so they told me, we still do our list of what I know, what I need to know, what's going to be my to-do list based on that. What do I need to go and research for myself? And so I felt that in the moment they might not have realized that those were the things that they were necessarily learning, but now reflecting on it, they realized, oh, I really was learning how to be, hold myself accountable. I really was learning how to set goals for myself. And so all of that was kind of, in the background. And those were things that they were learning, underlying things that they were learning outside of just learning their content. And, we say that those are life ready skills that we're embedding in when we're coaching teachers, and that ultimately the students learn, they learn those life ready skills. And so it's just so interesting now how those life ready skills that they were building are now helping them when, they're sophomores, juniors right now in college. And they said that the transition was so much easier. They knew how to pace themselves and how to hold themselves accountable for whatever, assignment and or thing they needed to do that was assigned by professors. So that was just interesting to hear and to have them reflect on.
I'll just add, Angela mentioned in the chat that this really helps them become critical learners. And I love what you said about that, Angela, because it's so true. In going into this type of classroom setting, you know, in person or virtually, giving students the opportunity to dig in and take ownership over the work is so important. And no longer school is, you know, something that's being done to them. It's something that they're doing, and they're you know, making some of those pathways, making choices, and you definitely see a whole different side of learners and the skills that they gain from that. Like Ashley was saying, it's so critical for their life, and like what Shannon mentioned in the opening, like that, the river's gonna move. And so if we are like making them this bridge that is not going to be, you know, agile and flexible, truly those life ready skills are what they utilize later to be successful in any setting. So.
That's great. Thank you very much. Let's talk about what skills do teachers need to be able to successfully implement competency-based learning. So kind of just reflect on your own experience and just things that you want to share.
I like what Lauren said earlier. I think one of them is just a mind shift, like a complete mind shift, and being, you know, I think we've heard from teachers that we've worked with now, because the E2L model is a competency-based model, and pretty much every model that we help districts create for themselves is a competency-based model, that there's a shift that happens where they realize at some point, wow, I can still, and these are great teachers, you know, that have gotten really good results, but at some point realizing if I shift this way, then I'm actually going to get more done. Like the learners are going to get more done, and shifting the way they think about time is one thing. Another one, and kind of control too, you know, like actually letting the learners take control and build their path is going to get us farther down the road. The other one is they have to understand their standards really well, because you've got to align your pre-assessment questions to your standards. You've got to align your formative assessments to your standards. You've got to really be able to dig into the standards. So instead of being topic-based or activity-based, or, you know, like, oh, this is about, you know, X, so it'll be a good activity, it makes you get super discriminating about the resources, activities, and everything that you're providing to learners, because it's really got to be aligned not just to the standard topic, but to the depth of the verb, to the actual word in the standard, to the application that's required in the standard, so that, you know, like Lauren and Ashley both mentioned, you know, the accountability comes back to that. And so if that's the pathway, and I'm not just filling time with something that is loosely related and talking about it, I've got to make sure all those resources. So it's a lot of upfront design time. That skill is really important, putting that upfront design time in to align those things and be real discriminating about what's in the standards. Ashley and Lauren, what else would y'all add?
Can I say something about that?
Sure, okay. Of course.
One of the things that I remember when I was still in the classroom, I had an administrative leader who felt it was just the most important thing for students to understand the standards that we're teaching them, and that it was very important for us to go in there every day and teach them to understand what that standard meant. Just putting it on your board and checking it off your list, like many of us have said here, does not help the student understand what it is he has to master. And when you teach them what that standard means and what it is that they have to master, and they gain the understanding of what that looks like and the types of work that you give them to show their learning, you're just amazed at the not only the creativity of students, but you're getting more bang for your buck in those students who perhaps don't have certain skills with reading, who don't have certain skills with working out problems, but they can talk you through it, or they can show you by creating something. There's so many different, and I've said this, I'm a big proponent of students being able to show you what they know other than just paper and pencil, other than just that test. Because at the end of the day, if they really didn't understand it, or if they really can't read very well, they're not able to show you. They're not able to show you when you give them the paper and pencil test. But if they can build it or create it, or you give them different opportunities where they can explain it to you, then you know that they have mastered that learning. Because I worked in a school where mastery of learning was everything. And so you had to give them a myriad of ways, different opportunities to show you in case they were a few years behind in reading and didn't understand some of the questions on the test. In case they were a ELL learner and didn't understand, what the question meant. So you had to provide these different opportunities for those students to learn, or you weren't doing your job in the classroom. And so that really opened my eyes to finding different activities, different ways for them to really show me that they understood what mastery of learning means when I taught them what this standard was. So now with us working in this environment, it's going to be even more critical for us to be aware of how we roll out our learning for our students. What are they going to be able to show us to prove that they have mastered what we've asked of them? So I just think that that is one of the critical keys in us moving forward in a virtual platform with our kids.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Angela. And I think, we could be spending time on activity. There's so much stuff. This is something I've just, this is why competency-based learning and mastery learning is really important. It's really standards aligned learning. And to your point, like, people have been so generous, and it's been really cool to see how many vendors have been sharing out like all these free resources. But we could provide students a lot of free resources or even online software, and they could be engaged, they could be busy and they could be engaged. If it's not aligned to the standards, we're not making any progress. So we need to, be careful about what resources we are using, making sure they're aligned. And then once you invest that time in them understanding what the true standards are, they can know why they're doing what they're doing, because they know that they're going to be held accountable for the mastery of the standards. So yeah, I love that. It's, it's all about, that's where it is. So why not just, cut to the chase in some ways, right? That's what this is. It's just like, let's get all that other stuff out of the way. Just cut to the chase. That's what they're held accountable for. That's what they have to master. Show them that, align everything to it. Ideally even grading and reporting could be aligned to it, because that's really how they're held accountable. So thank you for sharing that, Angela. Sorry, Mitzi. Go ahead.
No worries. I am, just to keep us, kind of on track, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what are some challenges maybe that you experience when implementing competency-based learning and grading in your classroom? Lauren, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about that?
Sure. I would say, so a couple of challenges, but they're great, fun challenges to, work out. One would be just, as students are learning in different ways and potentially or it might be on different paths from each other, formatively assessing learners to ensure they're making progress and showing growth in that standard can be a challenge. But it's a great challenge, because it's really what you thought teaching would be like as a teacher. You're really checking in, you're pulling small groups, you're doing everything you can to use your data to drive what you're doing with kids in the classroom. But that can be challenging as well to manage those pieces. And so some kind of tracking tool is super helpful. And then the other thing would just be, I would say, if you have an LMS that you consistently use in the classroom, that's, in case we have micro closures and you have to kind of go in and out, that can help make your transition seamless. Because when you do all that design work and that standards alignment piece, you're providing, great resources, and maybe you've designed your formative assessments. If you use your LMS in the classroom and outside the classroom, it's going to make that transition back and forth more seamless. But it just helps you as a teacher stay organized with everything that's going on. There's a lot of moving parts, but again, it's a great challenge to have, because it's super fulfilling when you are really helping kids specifically master and get what they need.
If I might add to that, Mitzi, I think reflecting after I had obviously implemented for a few years, reflecting back, I would have, put systems into play from the beginning that, I learned how to do throughout. So that was the student tracking system so that they were able to, track their learning and their mastery, as well as the systems I set up for them to show their mastery. Because you do have all these moving parts, like Lauren mentioned, you have a kiddo that's over here, a kiddo that's over here at this level, at this level. So I think really taking time to set up those systems initially, so that as they were moving through a given unit, I didn't have to worry about building those systems. It was created, they were tracking, they knew where to go to show, to assess for mastery. So really having those systems in place was a game changer for me.
Those are great. Thank you guys for sharing. I love just, really the fact that y'all reflected and you shared, you learned things along the way, but you wish you had learned those, or put those in place in the beginning would have been a little bit smoother sailing for everyone. But that's a great part of us being able to share today, is so that maybe people on this call then will put those systems into place earlier on. So thank you. The next question. Oh, go ahead, Sharon.
One other thing too, I just thought of this, but one thing I would say is if you're implementing a model that includes collaboration, et cetera, one of the things we've seen is the mistake of people giving a group grade, or like, as people, if kids are collaborating, like standards mastery is individual. So it really should never be graded as a group. You will get so much pushback, and you'll get into a lot of, trouble in terms of giving out a group grade. So I just caution people on that, because that's something else that we've seen people do, and it's natural. Like, you want them to collaborate, you want them to work together, but their standards mastery should be an individually graded, individually assessed and graded piece. So I wanted to share that out. And if you're thinking about going to standards aligned or competency-based reporting, then talk to me individually, because that's a whole other set of challenges that we won't get to right now. But if you are trying to move to, which I think is the way to go, I mean, I absolutely think is the way to go, but that brings a whole other set of challenges. So
that's great. The next question I have is sort of the opposite of the last question. So what successes have you and your students experienced as a result of implementing competency-based learning and grading?
I can go ahead and tackle that one. I think I've kind of mentioned this embedded in the other questions, but ultimately, I was able to differentiate the way that I always wished I could have, before. But once I made this shift to focusing on mastery and the students focusing on mastery, I was able, and obviously focusing on the standards, right? Because that's how my grade book, that's how their tracking system was set up by standard. I was truly able to differentiate who needed specific help on a specific standard, and maybe even specific things within a standard. It wasn't even the entirety of the standard. And so I just felt that in knowing that and in tracking that, and it was just, my students were successful because they knew where they were at, they knew what they needed, they weren't waiting for me. And so at the end of the day, when we look towards the end of the year, I had just about 100% of those students mastering every single standard, because I took the time to work with those that truly needed that, very small group with the teacher as the facilitator, versus, other students that knew that could move on and can go beyond just the mastery and then move on to another standard. So it gave me the time and the time to work in those small group workshops with my students. And so at the end, when we take everything into account, they were that much more successful, because everything was very targeted, it was very aligned, and we knew at any given point, who was at mastery, who wasn't. If it was something that, warranted, me kind of coming in and supporting, and they needed me as the facilitator of the classroom to support them, great. If it was something that they could have a peer tutor them on, then we had that time and that space, and it was all within our systems to have that, work, through what we had going on in our classroom. So I just felt at the end of the day, the students gained more out of setting up our classroom this way than had it been everybody's learning the same thing at the same time, we're all getting the same assignments. We would have been restricted to what their learning would have been, and this way they were able to go beyond, whatever we might have set up, they went beyond it. And so I just felt at the end of the day that they were that much more successful and had developed more life skills along the way as well. And to me, that was truly important. I wanted them to learn the content, of course, but I also wanted them to learn these life skills that they would need outside of my classroom, outside of the algebra content. They would transfer, with them in any class and in any situation. And so if we say that success is just the content and just, getting mastery of the content, then we're missing all the other skills that we're trying to build in our students. And I felt that this allowed them to be successful in many aspects outside of just the content.
And I'll just add to that. I originally worked at a very traditional middle school, and then a new neighborhood middle school was opening up with a leader with a vision. And when I moved to that, I also went up a grade level. So I had the opportunity to have about 35% of my 7th graders come to the new school with me as 8th graders. And I remember about 3 weeks into the year, one of my students, who was very challenging, wonderful, of course, but challenging, yelled across the room. He goes, "Hey, miss." I was like, "Yeah." He said, "We should have done this like this last year." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" He was like, "I feel like I can actually do this." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." It had created some efficacy in the learner, that had been missing in the past. And so that, for me, I was like, there's a lot of moments that were like that where I was all in, but that was one of the ones with that specific student that I was like, okay, that's a change. That's different. Now I'm not going to have to, this isn't going to be a battle every day. Students feel like I can come in and I can do this. I see where I'm going, where I need to go. I've got the choice. This person is here guiding me along the way. And so that was a big aha for me that was definitely a success, not for that one student, but for all the students. And then for me as a teacher, I was like, well, I'm never going back now.
Mitzi, I'll just share too, Lauren and Ashley have done a great job of sharing, from a teacher's perspective, really what, the things that you're passionate about that you can see in your learners and what you got into the profession for. And I'll share from an administrator standpoint and just working with school districts now, 200 plus school districts now. We've used this for student achievement and school turnaround. And for what the thing that I think is amazing, the results are outstanding, like 20% gains in 1 year for, students with special needs, ELL students in every subject. Lauren taught science, Ashley taught algebra. So Lauren taught middle school science, Ashley taught high school math. And we've seen it in literacy, with kindergartners. We've seen it in every single subject, every single grade, and unbelievable results with chronically low performing campuses. Using this, turning them around in 1 year, getting them to meet AYP, getting them out of their, required status, unbelievable results. And the biggest gains for students that were the most at risk. So seeing this like huge jumps in student achievement. Now that plus all of the great things that they're saying. So I just can't say enough, like how important it is to shift that, because it truly closes the gap. I like for learners that need the gap closed, it truly closes the gap, but at the same time, it doesn't hold back anybody. That's what's so amazing about it. So you can have this heterogeneous classroom with all these different needs, and everybody gets what they need. And you can see results on our website. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, every time we get into a school turnaround situation, I'm just amazed. I'm like, once again, in every subject, these huge gains, and it's so cool. So it's like, that creates efficacy also, right? For students and teachers. Like when people have been just beating their heads against the wall for years trying to figure out, what can I do more? Like, what can I do more? And you can't do anymore because you're working so hard already. It's got to be that shift that shifts the whole process. And then you can get the results that, the students deserve and the teachers deserve and the principals deserve. Everybody deserves that's been working so hard at it all this time. So, yeah.
Those are great. I almost just want to end the interview on that note, just because I love hearing the celebrations from just being in the classroom and at the district level with data. But we have about 1 more minute to answer this last question. And Shannon, I'm actually going to direct this one to you. If districts are interested, in pursuing competency-based, learning and grading, what advice would you give to them embarking on that journey?
So, first of all, please do it. Please do it. Because right now you need to do it. I don't know another way. I really don't know another way. And I mean, I'm not claiming to know everything, but I've been in this business for a very long time, worked with a lot of districts and seen a lot of things. And I think right now, like, I don't know if I was in anyone's shoes in a district right now, I don't know another way to do this well this fall. But so let's say you decided, yes, I'm going to do it. The next thing would be, you've got to really assess, I used to do curriculum writing this summer. You've got to really look at, what are the formative assessment questions? What are the pre-assessment questions? What are the standards aligned resources that we have available? Truly standards aligned at the level of thinking, the depth of knowledge of each of those standards, and how do I provide those out? Plus, how do I provide guidance on how, and Ashley and Lauren have talked about this way of doing the grade book. Like, how do I provide guidance out on how to set up the grading of this appropriately? Because, obviously that's going to be an important thing this year too, like how we're getting that. So those things, like, how do I provide standards aligned resources that are really aligned to the level of standards? If you don't have to write out all the units, but if you can do exemplars, that's great. But if not, at least having those resources and making sure you have those things vetted is really important, so that teachers and students are spending their time on things that are going to lead to mastery. And then, providing coaching. I mean, you like, the people need help with this over time. It's a big shift, and there's a lot of other things shifting. So making sure to provide support along the way. This is not a train people go. Like, as a district or campus leader, this is what is the intentional, scheduled support that I'm going to provide throughout the year, not just reactive, not just when people are freaking out or need it, but it's already scheduled support throughout the year, because we know we're making a shift in every way. How do we support that along the way? Those would be the big things.
That's great, Shannon. Thank you. I love how, Lauren said support from her coach was critical in this process. So that's amazing. I also just wanted to end this session by just saying I really appreciate everybody that joined us. There are some session resources on the session catalog. So there's a blog that Shannon wrote on how to mitigate learning loss. The E2L learning model with free resources that has templates are also linked, along with our specific interview questions. And then we also have some virtual professional learning courses that you can purchase. So one on specifically competency-based remote or blended learning course. So please check those out if those might be of benefit to you as you're embarking on this journey. And I just wanted to thank our interviewees for just taking some time to share some of their knowledge with us.